this down, correct? Good afternoon. Today is September the 8th, 2021. I am Brad Whitmore, representing the 99th Bomb Group Historical Society, and I have the honor and privilege of getting to talk to Phil Moyer. Phil is one of the last surviving members of the 99th Bomb Group and has a fascinating life story, and we are going to have the opportunity to talk with him. We had lunch a little while ago, and we are in for a treat to hear more about him. Phil, like I say, it's an honor and a privilege to get to have this opportunity to talk to you. So if you're ready, here we go.
I'm ready. I think by the end of the interview, you'll probably be calling me Philip, because I was named after my grandfather, and my grandfather said it's Philip, just like in the Bible, which he didn't know, so I'm just kidding around. But anyway, why don't we just start out with the questions you might have?
Sure.
And we'll go from there.
Well, my first question at this point is now, do you prefer to be called Philip?
Absolutely.
Philip it is. Thank you.
When I was a kid, there was a comedian on the radio named Phil Silvers.
Oh yeah.
And he was, as far as I'm concerned, a load. And that's when I really hated to start with the name Phil.
Well, very good. Well, thank you for correcting me. That glad to get that straightened out.
Philip, just like in the Bible.
Okay, Philip it is. There we go. And if I mess up, I have to put $1.
Everybody does. Don't worry about it.
I have to put $1 in the name call bucket. All right. So first topic. How about we talk about your childhood growing up and your early interest in aviation?
Well, I was born in 1924, but most of my recollections started in the 30s. And so by the time I was of any age to start looking at things, the great flyers in World War I were of interest, and you could buy pulp magazines with the flyers, G8 and his Battle Aces, and all these pulp magazines of German and British, English, American flyers in World War I. And I would always wait for them to come out. You buy them at the newsstand by the month and you read them. I also made all kinds of model airplanes, Fokker D8s, Fokker triplanes, de Havillands, this and that and the other. And there was a radio show. I'm skipping around a little bit with my memory, but it was Buck Rogers in the 25th century. I was also intrigued. I was always very scientific and technically minded as a kid, and I was also interested in space absolutely, and even today, if I want to talk about things that are just out of this world, that's space. So I've sort of roamed around a little bit. What else could I say on this question?
Well, let me ask, what airplane do you first remember seeing and going, that's what I want to do?
We had a local airport. It was a grass airport, Doylestown, Pennsylvania airport. And these World War I aces and people with old planes used to come in. I forget the World War training plane that had the big radiator in the front of the pilot sticking up there, and that was my first recollection of planes that came in. But we also had Colonel Clarence Chamberlain, he came with a big passenger plane. The joke of the day was that the two farmers that they were talking about going up in Chamberlain's airplane for $1 a trip. And the second farmer said, he says, you go if you want. He says, but I don't think I want to go up there. He says, when, and the first guy said, well, he says, don't be afraid to go up. He says, when your number's up, your number's up. He says, yeah, but he says, what's going to happen if I'm up there and the pilot's number's up?
Yeah, you can't argue with that kind of logic.
And so that was kind of a brief history, but I mean, you know, with the years went by when we were kids, and we used to fool around with this stuff all the time.
Sounds good. We are experiencing some audio difficulties, so we'll get that out right now. I hope that this audio is able to be understood by everyone, and we will try to speak up. So World War II broke out, and you were in school, and that's an interesting story about your thought processes at the time and led up to the point that you joined the Army Air Corps.
Well, it's funny because of the Great Depression and the fact that people were so involved in the Great Depression. Starting in the early 30s, I sort of have kept track of everything that the United States is going through historically. And so when World War II came about, it actually started in, well, of course, the Germans and the Italians were making waves even before, but it actually started in 39. I guess when the Germans invaded Poland. So in 39, I counted the years on my fingers, and I decided that the war would never last long enough for me to get into the war. But of course, that changed. We didn't get into the war until late 1941. Well, actually, until they put us in the war. And by then, I was getting to think more about the fact that I might end up in the war and what I would do if I did. And naturally, the one thing I wanted to do if I did get in the war is I wanted to fly around like the aces did in World War I.
Good thinking. How about, when did you join the Army Air Corps? What year was it? Where'd you sign up? And what was that initial experience like and your training time, including your time in Sebring?
Well, that's a little bit of a stretch, but
Yeah.
I was 18 in April of 42. And immediately I decided that I might get in the war. And if I got in the war, I wanted to fly. And about that time, the doctor lived up the street, his son came home, and he was resplendent and had just graduated from Navy flying school. And he had this beautiful dark blue uniform with the gold and everything else, the epaulets. And I said, that's for me. I'm going down to Philadelphia. I was just 18 in April. And I said, I'm going down to Philadelphia and join and sign up for the Navy flying school. And then when I really got to thinking about it, I was a terrible swimmer. And during the Depression, never had the money to join the town pool. So I was a terrible swimmer. So I was actually on my way down to join the Navy, but I went over to the Army instead. And I joined the Army Air Corps so I could keep my feet on the ground if I was in between flights. So I joined the Army Air Corps, but right away in 42 when I was 18, but they didn't call me up until January of 43. and they sent me to Miami Beach. And they put me in the Collins Hotel at 21st and Collins. We were in the Charles Hotel there, and we had a corporal, an infantry corporal that was assigned to us, and he was our kind of father confessor. And also he took us out every day to the Miami Beach golf course and drilled us all the time and taught us how to be good soldiers. We did KP and all that stuff. That went on for a couple of months. And during that time, they gave us a test, 900 of us, because they no longer required college to get in the Air Corps. And yet they wanted to send the people to college enough that they learned about enough physics to learn about the atmosphere and all the things that that are physical about flying. And so they gave us this test, but they needed people from after the first couple of months. So they gave us this test, and the people that were tops of the test only went to college training detachment for 2 months. But then it went from there on with the next 20% 3 months, next 20% 4 months, till the end of till 100%. And I was lucky enough, there were 900 applicants, and they told me I was up in the top 10 or something of the test. So I only had to go to Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina, for little less than 2 months to learn physics and some basic mathematics and stuff like that. And from there, they sent me to Maxwell Field, Alabama. Everything was like 2 months. And we were lower classroom for 2 months and upper classroom for 2 months, taking pre-flight training, mostly, again, military training, and the upperclassmen grinding you out when you were an underclassman, and vice versa when you were an upperclassman. And right after that, they sent us to Nashville, Tennessee. Oh, and by the way, in Maxwell Field, they send airplanes in now and then for us to look at to decide what airplanes we liked. And they flew in this B-17, and it looked like maybe it was a house with 4 engines. And I decided that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just keep telling them I want to fly the B-17, because that would mean that after everybody that grew up in depression was worried about jobs. And I said, if I learn to fly the B-17, if I live through the war, I'll get a job flying for the airlines. And so anytime anybody asked me, any of the officers or whatever, I said, I want to fly the B-17. No matter what they asked me, I said, I want to fly the B-17. So they sent me to Nashville. That's where they decided. They gave us a bunch of men on physical tests and decided whether you were going to be a bombardier, a navigator, or a pilot. And I just kept saying, I want to fly the B-17. And the psychiatrist would say, did you ever make love to your mother? And I said, I want to fly the B-17. So that was they didn't make any commitment, but that's the way I left the place. And they sent me to Lafayette, Louisiana for 2 months of primary training. I loved Lafayette, Louisiana. It was in a small town in the South. I loved the South. All my training was in the Southeast Training Command. So anyway, I went there for 2 months. And to move on and save some time, and they sent me to Malden, Missouri for 2 months. And I was in Malden, Missouri. Malden, Missouri at that time was the, what do they call it? What is it called? Gonorrhea and syphilis. It's a venereal disease. Malden was the venereal disease capital of Missouri. But lucky I wasn't around to that kind of stuff yet. So 2 months in Malden, then I went to Stuttgart, Arkansas for advanced training. And that's when they finally, because I found out that I was heading at least partway to the B-17, at least multi-engine bombers, because that the Arkansas base was twin engine AT-10s, which was kind of a plywood version of the AT-11. And I flew that for 2 months there. I graduated in February of 45. Was it 45? 44, February 44. February 44. And so I graduated in February 44. And it was funny. I was one of the tail end graduates in primary at 12 hours. And I was the first in advanced at 5 hours. And it seemed like I was kind of always itchy about flying to start with, but once I learned a little bit, I got better, and sometimes better than the other guys. So anyway, I got some leave at home, and then they sent me to Florida, to Sebring, Florida, to fly the B-17, which is exactly what I wanted. So it was one of the few times, I guess, that the military came through with what you wanted to do. So I learned to fly the B-17 at Sebring, again, because I was always kind of itchy when I started out. It's amazing because I really can't lean back and think of myself at the controls of a B-17 at Sebring. But I know that I was. We never went up alone. There generally were 2 or 3 students, took turns, and we had instructors to boot. But I mean, obviously I had to fly and I had to get out of there, but I'm getting back to the fact that I was a kind of a weird starter, but a good ender. So anyway, I graduated from Sebring, and I went to Dyersburg, Tennessee for overseas training. I didn't like Dyersburg. I was also, and that's where I got my co-pilot and crew. And I actually started out with a crew that was going to go overseas with me in the B-17. Started out, like I said, always slow, always a little itchy. Got better near the end. But the one thing I didn't like was the idea of flying the northern route to England. England was the only place we thought of at that time where they were going to send the B-17s. And I just didn't like the idea of taking off with 9 guys and myself, and then flying up to the Arctic and hitting Greenland and Iceland and all those places. And it kind of made me not itchy or afraid, but kind of tentative, about the whole thing. So I went to Kearney, Nebraska, and I was pretty well prepared that I was going to make this northern trip, whether I liked it or not. And all of a sudden they called us in 13 crews the next day. And they said, we're 13 planes short. So 13 crews, we're starting to train crews on, they've taken the ball turret out and they put the radar in there, and they're training the bombardiers to bomb by radar. So we're sending you 13 crews down to Langley Field, Virginia, so that you can fly these B-17s with even the belly turret guy went with it was a belly turret or not. And that you guys are going to go down, and before you go back overseas, you're going to fly these radar planes. And the funny thing is that the other thing that was nerve-wracking at that time was that it was that peak of the killing war in Europe. And so this was like a retrieve. So they sent me down to Virginia, Langley Field, and I had 2 or 3 months there, flying radar planes all over eastern United States, night and day. And I really got to where I was really so confident of flying the B-17. I probably thought I was the best B-17 pilot in the world. And so when they finally sent me overseas after 2 or 3 months of that, I was like an experienced airlines pilot of today. I mean, we went the northern route as far as Newfoundland, but then we went back over to the Azores, to Africa. And my final destination was outside of Foggia, Italy, in an air base named Tortorella that was a German-Italian air base during the World War II. And then once the Allies got north of Rome, they moved the Air Force that was in Africa up to all these bases. It was also in a big plain where it was the wheat belt of Italy, and there was at least a dozen air bases there. An interesting fact about that is that they sent me up to Africa. Talk about a welcome for a newcomer. They sent me up from Africa on my final leg to go to the 99th Bomb Group at Tortorella. And they gave me that destination, told me all about it, gave me the maps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we took off for the 99th Bomb Group. And as I got near, finally got up, it was a several hour flight, quite maybe, as I recall, maybe 3-4 hours, something like that. And as I got near the air base, I could see these flares going up and all these B-17s coming in, obviously from a mission. The flares were from planes that wanted to land early with wounded or whatever. And so the base was called Sandfly. So I called Sandfly, told them who I was, what I was doing there. And Sandfly said, well, we don't know where you're supposed to be, but you're not supposed to be here. And I'm landing a mission with wounded and everything else, and get lost. So there I am in the middle of Italy, and I think that I'm going to get a welcome. And they tell me to get lost. I have no maps. I have no idea of what else. All I had was where I was going. I didn't know anything about the other terrain, the air bases, anything. But I knew that there were other air bases around. So I just started flying someplace else, looking around because we were low on fuel. And I saw what was a sand gravel strip, obviously for fighter planes. But I knew I could get down. The plane was practically out of fuel and light and everything else. So I landed on the thing, and it was a American pursuit base. And they were surprised as hell, but they finally came out to help me out. And then they left to try to find out where I was supposed to go. And they came back and told me I was supposed to go that I'd been sent to the wrong place, that I was supposed to go to a Repel Depot about 100 miles down. And it was almost dark. They told me I better head for this Repel Depot immediately. And I should look for a big cathedral with a black dome. And of course, it was almost dark, so it would be pretty hard to see the cathedral with a black dome. But they sent me off, and we went down and we found, and it wasn't as, it was not as dark as it really felt, when they told you had to go. But anyway, we went down there and we landed at the Repel Depot. And the next day we took the plane back up to the 99th Bomb Group where we were supposed to go. And that's quite a reception, you know, when you think it's important enough that you're going overseas and you're going to be welcomed and everything else.
Yeah, you bet.
And then you better believe the next day we come in with this brand new airplane, and they tell me that I should go down a gravel taxi strip that they just put in, that I shouldn't go back down the runway to get to my revetment where they want me to go. So I start down the gravel strip, and the right gear goes down where evidently they made a drainage pipe underneath, and they hadn't properly compacted it. So the right gear goes down. I shut off everything because of the fact that I figured, well, I may bend the right prop if I keep trying to work my way out of this thing. So the tower agrees on me, and they say, we're going to vacate the airplane and we'll take care of the airplane. Somebody's coming out with trucks and stuff and take you everything to your tent. And so the truck came out to take us to the tent. I'm telling you all this because this is quite a reception for somebody that is getting into something brand new and think that they're doing something important.
This is great. Keep it coming.
So so anyway, they send the truck out, and the guys in the truck, they give you, in case you get downed on the way over, and you had 10 cases of K rations in the bomb bay, and 10 and what was it? Every 10 45s. Don't ask. Everybody had a case of K rations and a 45. The 10-man crew. So that was all in the bomb bay. So the guy says, the other guys will strip your airplane. You better take this out and put it in your tent. So they put it in the tent under my bed, and I think it stayed there for the entire time I was overseas. I had 10 cases of K rations and 10 45s under my bed. I actually took the 145 out once, because when I was still green, they sent me out to get the whiskey for the bar because I didn't drink. Also there were women down in the town that they sent the guys out for to come back with a Jeep full of and a trailer full of whiskey, and the guys would stay down there for a couple of days. So they figured they'd send me. So I kept one of the 45, and then the guy that gave out the finance officer, he wouldn't give me the money. Then get up the next morning at 6 a.m. So I had to sleep with it under my pillow with a 45, because we slept in tents in Italy, and the townspeople used to roam. Some of the townspeople would roam around among the tents and everything, looking for goodies or this or that. It was innocent enough, so they didn't really patrol that tough. Okay, where am I? So.
Well, that's a great glimpse of you getting over there. I got a couple questions right off the bat. So when you did the northern route and went through the Azores and headed to Africa, do you remember the country that you landed in Africa? Did you go to Tunisia?
No, we landed in Africa in the first country, the one that's right there by the ocean. It's an Arab country.
Up on the north coast somewhere?
Northwest coast. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, it's funny, not Tunisia. There's a big town there, and there's some mountains in the distance. I should know that. I just can't come up with it.
You're right. That's all right.
I got a mental block on it right now.
Just
that was interesting because when we landed there, it was about 100 miles from the coast, inland from the coast. And when we landed there, we had to stay overnight, and they put us in this French Foreign Legion barracks. And it was a very old but clean, but it was all just masonry, and with a bunk with a wood bunk with a bed, a mattress on it, and they had broken bottles all around the top of the wall. It was an old French army camp. It was kind of interesting. And we did go into the town. I can't think of the name of it. I won't try to take the time to think of the name of the town right now.
That's okay.
But from there, we went to Tunisia, and then because that's a long stretch in Africa from the coast to Tunisia inland, and then up to Italy.
How about Casablanca? Did you go by Casablanca?
No.
Okay. Question. How many aircraft on that crossing? Were you a flight of one at that point, or did you have more with you?
Oh, no, there were more with us. It was funny how that there were so many things that happened at that crossing.
Oh, boy.
Because when you're thinking of more with us, there was a tail end of it. Oh, well, also two things. As I was approaching, I was the last one in the group. There were maybe 22 dozen airplanes in the group.
Okay.
And I was the last one, and I was also the last to take off. And they told me, they said, as I was approaching the airfield in Canada, they said, the ground fog is approaching. The heavy ground fog is on the ground, and it just creeps along like a blanket.
Oh, boy.
And they had no sophisticated radar to get you in. So they told me, they said, you better speed up because you got to get in here before the ground fog. So they made it extra that way. And I got in just before, I was the last one to get in before the ground. Then the fog opened up. Then meanwhile, a hurricane, the tail end of a hurricane was coming up in that area. And because that night, I landed during the day, and that night they made us sit up in the airplanes all night in case the wind velocity got enough. They didn't have enough tie downs so that they were going to shoot a flare, and we were going to turn the planes to keep them into the wind in case the wind came on. But along about 3 a.m. in the morning, they decided to let us out of the airplanes.
Wow. Wow, what a story. Now, the airplane you brought across was a conventional B-17, an F or a G, not a radar model.
It was a radar model.
It was a radar model.
As a matter of fact, that was another thing. We were overdue for the Azores, and we had this guy, Bill O'Rourke. He was assigned to me for the radar operator, and he was a great guy and a good radar operator, and a smart guy too, and much older than we were. And so we were overdue for the Azores, and all we had really was automatic compass, and they taught you that it is possible for the automatic compass to reverse.
Yes.
And if it reverses, it actually shows you like you're still ahead, but that you've actually gone past the point because it's reversed. Anyway, we were about not a half an hour, but we were getting to where we didn't like it,
Not a good
And I
feeling.
didn't like it. It wasn't a good feeling.
Not a good feeling.
So I got talking to the co-pilot and O'Rourke about this, and they had said, this is another thing, the crazy thing with the military. They forbade him to turn the radar on because if you're flying over the ocean and you're fooling around with the radar, a submarine may pick it up, a German submarine may pick it up and shoot you out of the air.
Wow.
or some such thing, So anyway, he was forbidden to turn the thing on. So O'Rourke hears me talking to the co-pilot, and he says, something be damned. He says, the radar is going on, and he says, Azores dead ahead.
That was a good feeling, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Nothing like thinking you're lost and then realizing you're
So when
found.
we got to Africa, we had a lot of headwinds that time. So when we got to Africa, he turned it on too, which I liked.
Very, very interesting. Well, that's a great intro. How we doing? We good to press on? I think we got, we're into the
I'm into
theater.
Foggia, right?
Yep, up to Foggia. How about,
Oh, by the way, I
oh,
was
yeah.
very interested because remember we talked about the fact that you said your father was shot up over Foggia?
Yes,
So that means that he was over Foggia when Foggia was still in German hands.
yes.
So I don't think he ever actually went to Foggia on duty, did he?
No, no, he was
Yeah.
out, when he departed the war, he was left out of North Africa.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Let's see, deployment journey. How about life at the base? Once you got accepted to the base you were going that you were talking about, what was life like there? You said that you lived
Well,
in
it
tents
was-
and what else? Went into
Well,
town
you
occasionally?
know, well, actually, our life at the base, as far as the living standards, you know, we often thought of the guys we heard you guys in England, you know, in barracks and how they'd go to London and they'd meet girls on their leave and go back to the base and this and that. And we were in tents, and I mean real tents. And they even still had the slip trenches for when the Germans were close, you know, if they came back and you're out in the open, you jump in the slip trench, you know. The only thing that happened with the slip trenches when we were there is sometimes when a guy would get too drunk, he'd walk out, come back from the officers club and fall in the slip trench. And he'd sleep the night out there. But anyway, we lived in these tents, and also the eggs were practically impossible to get. And I never bought them because I figured that maybe the kids were selling eggs that were in some laboratory experiment or something. But these kids, the young Italian kids, would sell us eggs and this and that and the other thing. So it was pretty much in the open with the tents. Our officers club was the only stone building, and it was actually where the Italian lived that took care of that section of track. There was a railroad track that went along there. There were no more trains at that time, obviously, but that was the officers club. And it was a kind of a wild existence, but very, and what was I thinking about? It doesn't matter. I was thinking some of the stories with the Italian kids, and they'd come around with sometimes with horse-drawn wagons with stuff in it that they wanted to sell and what have you. So it was kind of a rural existence, and so we didn't really have, and even the club, we got a little ration of beer. We got a little ration of beer a month, but we didn't get any whiskey, and there was no whiskey in the club. That's why I had to go down to the Italian place, and the standard drink in the club was cognac and juice, grapefruit juice.
It's different.
And which I was not enamored with. And we had a Victrola with two records on it. Nobody played it but me. I was the only one that liked classical records. And there was Dance of the Hours and Carmen were the only two records we had. And I probably, during my 6 months overseas or so, I probably listened to each one of them several hundred times. But I also was a good reader. I could read a book in the morning and a book. I'd finish up my second book at 3 a.m. or something like that. But it was really a Spartan existence as far as the living at the camp was concerned. We did get 2 rest leaves. The first rest leave was on the Isle of Capri. They were about a week long. But the second rest leave was the one we looked forward to because that was in Rome, and Rome was full of women. So everybody was looking for their second best slave in Rome.
Makes sense.
Most of us made it, some didn't.
Okay. All very interesting and great stuff. And of course, I'm hearing what you're saying and playing it against stories that I heard from my dad. So sometimes I'll be smiling and chuckling, tying the two together, but I won't interrupt your interview to talk about such things other than say they're going on. How about any comments on, you flew what, 35 missions, if I recall?
35.
35 missions.
Actually, when I went over, it was 25. But then they made it 30. But if you flew to Berlin or far into Germany, that counted as 2. No, I think, yeah, that counted as 2. Then they made it 35. And actually, of our 35 missions, especially near the end of the war, like my last few missions, the Germans had retreated. They were really heading into the Alps to go back to Germany. So they were local missions against the retreating Germans, because we weren't bombing targets deep in Germany anymore. So the only bad thing at all times, whether it was a big target or little target, was the Germans were great with the 88s and the flak. And I don't have no way of knowing, but I think we lost a lot more airplanes, even during the hot war. We lost a lot more airplanes to the 88s than we did to the flak. The 88s could fire 20, each 88 gun could fire 20 rounds per minute. And they 4 88 guns were, once they, this is why today you can't go near targets. You fly 40 miles out and release a missile, because 4 88s were attached to one radar controller. And so that meant that you got 80 rounds at 88 a minute. So if they were on target, and the only good part was back then the radar wasn't good enough, that when there was cloud cover and stuff like that, sometimes you'd see a whole sea of 88 bursts way off, and maybe 2 miles over there, all through the clouds,
Interesting.
But there wouldn't be any where you were. And you'd wonder why, but it's because the radar wasn't that good.
Interesting. So just to clarify, the 88s, you mentioned flak or 88s. Did the 88s shoot flak projectiles?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So that's yeah. Okay. That was my understanding. That was what my dad ended up.
Oh, yeah. When it went off in the air, it made a black cloud.
Yeah.
And that black cloud had shrapnel coming out
Right.
in all directions.
Right. I just want to make sure.
And it was also the 105. The 105 you didn't see very much of. There weren't that many of them. And that was a white gray cloud and much bigger.
Interesting.
And the only place that I've ever seen a lot of 105 was in Munich. Munich seemed to have a lot of 105s.
What was the farthest, deepest mission, longest lasting that you
We flew the longest mission in Europe. We flew from Foggia to Berlin and back. But it was done the only reason they did it was in March of 45. The only reason they did it is that the 15th Air Force 99th Wing, they just wanted the 5th Wing and 99th Bomb Group. It was to break a record. The only problem, the only reason we didn't like it was that was one of the few places where you could get the ME-262s.
Oh.
And we were the last. My co-pilot by then had become a pilot. He was flying off my wing. We were the last 3 planes. There was generally in our group about 160, 80 planes. That's all we had, the B-17s. And we were the last 3 planes over, so we knew that they would come then. And they did, but they just went, and that was the end of that.
Wow. Wow. So how long of a mission flight time was
Well,
that?
that was over 10 hours.
Over 10. So that's pretty much pushing the
That was-
endurance of a
that's-
loaded B-17,
That
wasn't
was
it?
it. And some of the guys, a lot of the guys dropped out over northern Italy or whatever. Oh, talking about dropping out, the wonderful thing about the 15th Air Force, and especially the B-17s, because the B-24s did go into Europe also, but they didn't go as deep into Europe as we did. B-24s were much better range at lower altitudes than the 17. But when you got up to 25,000 feet, the high altitudes, the B-17 was more economical on fuel.
Interesting.
I think only the B-17s went to Berlin.
Interesting. And
I guess I was going to say that. No, the interesting thing is we had to go, one of the worst parts about our missions were almost invariably when the war was hot, you had to go up over the Alps into Eastern Europe to places like Austria, and Vienna. I must have, and we were always after oil, which I liked, because that meant that we were helping to starve the Germans for oil, which was saving a lot of other soldiers' lives.
right. Well, let me ask you another question. You mentioned you've used the term when the war was hot. Does that mean prior to the Germans starting to retreat out of Italy, or what's the definition of the war being hot?
Yeah, once the Germans, I would say a couple of months into 45. The war didn't end until what, April or May of 45.
Sounds right.
But once the Battle of the Bulge, and that late winter, early winters, whatever it was, when you got in after the first couple of months of 45, we didn't go very much deep into Germany anymore, because they obviously, everybody, the powers that be, knew that they were on the ropes.
Gotcha. So prior or around that time, you were still doing raids into the northern part of Italy as the Germans retreated?
Well, we didn't.
Or I'm just guessing.
We actually continued to go into Germany. I would say the Berlin raid was in March, late February or early March of 45. And that was probably about the time that we started to more or less stop going into deep journey.
And I may have misspoken. I was actually, I was thinking about doing raids into the northern part of Italy as the Germans were retreating back towards Germany. Did you fly missions into the northern
Yes.
part of Italy?
I would say that my last 3 or 4 missions were all into northern Italy.
Okay.
Against retreating Germans.
A fascinating history, boy. This is I can't imagine a more intriguing way for me to spend an afternoon than to fill this story. And so this is great. How did that radar bomb sight system work out compared to the Norden?
I would say that it was not as accurate as the Norden. The radar didn't come in. The British brought the radar in early in the war, so it took a while. Like I said, I didn't get around to flying these radar bombers, and they were brand new then.
Mm-hmm.
And that was already in 44, well into 44.
Very early technology for that application, doing something that specific.
Uh,
I remember hearing the most important inventions of World War II for victory, and the Norden bomb sight was one of the things that was listed. So it was apparently a very solid apparatus.
It was a good apparatus, but still in all, you're talking about with the Norden bomb sight. I think my memory is correct that you're still talking about something like 20-25% of bombs directly on the target.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Because of the fact that you know, you got guys flying airplanes under bad conditions with flak and, you know, maybe all sorts of things happening, and especially during the bomb run, because that's where the targets were, was where the 88s were.
And also, if I got the story right, the word jet stream and understanding what one of those was not fully understood at that point in time. So you had upper altitude winds that weren't fully and completely accounted for. I picked that up somewhere. I don't know if it's accurate.
Yeah, they used to actually send out the, I think they always did. They would send out the observation planes early before missions to actually try to pick out when what they liked for bombing was, and we didn't like it, but they liked it because we'd fly directly into the wind, which would give the bombardier and the airplane maximum stability to drop the bombs.
Oh, yeah.
But that was the worst possible thing for the guys in the plane, because you're flying up into the upstream.
All right, longer exposure. Oh, interesting. Any other specifics before we move on about missions that stand out?
Well, you talked about people not like to talk about the war.
And that's fine if you don't want to.
No, but I mean, that doesn't mean anything to you, because it may be crazy, but I mean, the war was something that happened to me, and if somebody wants to know about it, I tell them. I think I'm lucky as hell to be able to be here and do that. But having said that, I mean, here I am, and some interesting things that happened to me during the war. And I'll tell you those two things. I'll remember. But there was one other thing I wanted to tell you that I've forgotten when we were talking about the flights. You know, when we flew home, Switzerland was, because of the going over the Alps, coming and going, Switzerland was almost always just right off our right wing, because we would fly east of Switzerland. We wouldn't fly over Switzerland.
Okay.
We couldn't fly over Switzerland. So we had to fly east of Switzerland.
That was because they were neutral?
Because they were neutral and we weren't allowed to do it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
We weren't allowed
Restricted
to do
airspace, essentially.
it. It was very much so.
Okay.
But however, if your plane was damaged, and you didn't think you could make it home, and this was modus operandi. If your airplane was damaged and you didn't think you could make it home, you should fly into Switzerland, and the Swiss radar would pick you up, and 2 Swiss Messerschmitts with Swiss crosses on them would come up and get on your wing and take you down into the Swiss airport. But once you're there, you have to go to a Swiss hotel and remain there for the rest of the war. So
Wow.
my ending to that always was, lucky we were all 20 and stupid, because if we'd have been 35 and intelligent, they wouldn't have had a goddamn airplane flying.
I stayed in a Swiss hotel before. They're not all that bad.
So
funny point, though. I hear you.
getting back to my other crazy experiences. We were over Vienna one time, and I was under the lead ship. I was the lead ship of the second element of three. And I was under the lead ship. And it was almost time for bombs away. And I'm looking up when for bombs away, you fly in formation, you're looking up into the bomb bay, you can actually see the bombs, you know, the lead ship. And you're down below here, right? So I'm flying here and I'm looking up, waiting for bombs away, right? And all of a sudden, an 88 shell goes up and boom, goes off right in the bomb bay of the plane I'm looking at. Luckily, nothing seemed to fly around when we were, because pieces flew all over the place. And one of the 500-pound bombs ended up over in his wing.
Oh,
And the whole right side of the plane is all blown out. And so we the formation sort of spread out because they figured, well, next thing is he's going to blow up, right?
mm-hmm.
Well, turns out that the plane dropped out of formation and we regrouped. Turns out that the plane, they flew the plane back to Foggia. They flew the plane back to where it came from.
Unbelievable.
But the radio operator and the ball turret guy were both killed. And they flew it back to Foggia. And so I heard about it. And because, you know, this happened to me the day before, right underneath this guy, I thought I'd go down to see the plane. I wanted to see the plane and what the damage was, you know. And so I went down to see the plane, and there were two or three enlisted men standing in front of me. And it's like a vivid, it's a vivid imagination in my memory. And I'm looking at the side of the plane, it's all blown off. And, it's blown down by the ball turret, what have you. And so this is a picture that stayed in my mind, right? And come up to years later, and they opened the Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian. And I'm down there with my wife and my two children. And it was when they first opened, and they had an exhibit of B-17s during World War II. And they had this picture, and here's the same two guys and the picture
Oh, my word.
of the airplane, And of course, I didn't have a picture. So I sent a letter to the Smithsonian, and they sent me some to pick from. And of course, it was easy to pick the one. And I picked it. And that picture hangs on my wall, and it's been hanging on my wall all the time next to my picture of myself during the war,
Oh, my word.
And
amazing story.
The Smithsonian, like I said, sent it to me. So, and
I will look for that next time I am up there. That's an amazing story. B-17s were known for being able to take a lick and stay airborne. The one with caught the wing of the fighter back at the back of the empennage, and the tail hung on.
They have lots of pictures. Smithsonian has lots of pictures of torn up the 17s.
Tough airplane.
I had another B-17 story I was going to tell you.
Oh, good.
But I can't think of what it was.
It'll come back. We can get back to
it'll
it.
Come back.
So how about this? What was a typical bomb load? 500s, or what varied on the mission?
Mostly always it was 500s. And we didn't carry as much as you would think, especially if you had to go deep, I would say maximum. And if it was someplace close in Italy, you might carry 12 500s.
Awesome.
But most of the time was anywhere from, I would guess, 6 to 10.
That's quite a load. And I don't remember, maybe you, what was the max bomb load? I think it was 2,000 pounds, a couple of 2,000 pounders, or a number of 2,000 pounds, if I recall.
Well, I never got, I don't think I had much experience with the bigger ones.
No,
I think for some reason we carried 1,000 pounds someplace once,
Yeah.
but I can't even remember.
Yeah, just curious. Okay, well, that's all great. We'll get back to that story when it comes back to you, because I don't want to miss that. Okay, how about returning to the States and the end of your military career. How'd that go? Were you there till the war was officially over, or?
No, I actually started back then. I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when the war ended.
Wow.
And I was not happy about that because as soon as we landed in Boston, I realized if we'd have been back in the US, it would have been a really raucous day.
Yeah, apparently. So you got back, so you did the northern route out of Italy across Europe and
Actually, no,
No?
I purposely did not. I came back, I went over to Naples and I came back on a troop ship, the Mariposa. The
oh,
Mariposa was actually a Matson liner to Hawaii before the war. It was about a 30,000 tonner. It was a nice ship, but it was in April, and they gave me. I had the room all to myself. I found out why, because the room would go up about 40 feet and go down about 40 feet with the waves, and I never saw anybody on deck for the whole time I was there
oh my word.
because we had a really rough crossing. But
Wow.
I never had much trouble with air sickness, so I didn't get seasick. But
You're lucky.
I sure had a galloping gurdy of a room, I want to tell you.
So how was the overall load of personnel? I've seen some of those pictures of people, troops coming back from the war, have just maxed out, whatever kind of ships.
They sent my buddy back. He was in the infantry. They sent him back in an aircraft carrier, a midget aircraft carrier, and they put bunks all below the flight deck. And they got in one of these North Atlantic. He was in Italy also, and they got into one of these North Atlantic deals where the flight deck was almost dragging in the water. And he said it was the most miserable 6 days that he ever had in his life. He says everybody in the world was sick.
Oh, and that spreads. One person goes and it's just like, oh.
But the Atlantic crossing can get rough during the rough weather.
Oh, yeah.
Or even during good weather if it turns. That's why I think of the old pilots, the pilots that started out early and everything. I mean, weather's unpredictable.
That is true. So you got back to the States, and how long till you discharged out of the Army Air Corps?
Well, the one thing I knew was that there were so many pilots back from Europe that I wanted to stay in the Air Force. But there were so many pilots back from Europe. I said, what are we going to do with all these guys? I mean, it's going to be a tough competition. Then I heard about the GI Bill. And of course, originally I thought when I went to the B-17 that I could become a passenger airlines pilot or any kind of a pilot. So I decided, well, I've always wanted to study engineering. So I decided, well, they're not going to have there's not going to be any real flight time in the near future for any of us. And there wasn't, even for those that stayed in. So I decided to go to school under the GI Bill. And I signed up for engineering at Lehigh University. And I signed up for civil engineering because I like the idea that civil engineers work outside a lot on dams and bridges and stuff, and you didn't have to be in an office at a drafting board. So I signed up and I tried very hard to get flying time because I didn't get out of it. I didn't get out until just before the Korean War.
Oh.
And the only reason during that time, even though I tried, they had AT-11s in Middletown, Pennsylvania, and I was at Lehigh in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and nobody was getting flying time. I I negotiated with the Air Corps flying guys for my work on military bases as an architect engineer. I once went to Wiesbaden, Germany to negotiate with some other guys, and we were supposed to negotiate with this Air Force officer on NATO air bases, and we went all the way from Paris to Wiesbaden for the day he told us, and we got there, and the secretary, the male secretary there, said, well, sorry, but he was offered flying time that day, and that was the only way he gets his 50%. So there wasn't going to be any meeting. So we turned around and went back to Paris. So that's what you face really until and even then, I said to myself, I really felt badly about the fact that in the Korean War, a lot of the pilots had to fly 200 of these guys back and forth, the infantrymen back and forth, and they even lost a couple planes. And I just, it was not a good scene.
Yeah, yeah, whole different thing. Very interesting. So what year would that have been? Around 1950?
51.
51 or so.
Yeah.
Okay. So you went in, you got into civil engineering at Lehigh. You had mentioned how fast you were able to read when you're talking about reading books, one in the morning, one at night. So that puts you as an advanced student right there, as far as I'm concerned. Did you take a natural shining to liking engineering? Did it come easily to you?
Yeah, I had no trouble with engineering. I really, until what happened with me is that everything, to be tops and everything, it had to be in your own brain. I was really before all the computers and the drafting machines and everything else. We had drafting boards, and did all the stuff by hand. So I'm sort of a prehistoric person. But I never had. I would say that my head kept me ahead of the pack.
Cool. That's a great thing to be able to say.
As long as it depended on heads only.
Okay, so did you start school while you were still in, or did you wait to get out to get the GI Bill going to commence?
Well, see, what happened is because they had all these pilots, I didn't have any problem. They put me on TDY immediately while the war in Japan was still on. I even missed the celebration for the war in Japan because I was with my buddy's mother watching him pitch a baseball game in Maryland someplace. So anyway, I digressed.
That's all right.
But
it's good digression.
Yeah, but I know when I went to Lehigh, I went to sign up in September of '45, and the lady at the desk said to me, she said, well, we have you military guys coming in here all the time now because the war is basically over, and this was early September, or late August, so the war was over in Japan also. So she said, we have she said, when were you thinking of coming? And I said, September, next month. I guess it was late August. And she says, just a minute. She jumped over the desk and took me in to see the head cheese, and that was all there was to it. And those, I didn't have to go far from there to get into Lehigh.
Great. So that pretty well gets you up through, you would have been what, 20,
Let's see, that was
23 maybe?
that was
Give or take?
the fall of, was that the fall of 45? Yes, it was the fall of
Is there
45.
25-ish, give or take.
So I was fall of 45, 24, I was 21.
He's better at math than I am. Anyway,
Yeah.
so, okay, all right, so first guess counted for me. So from there, you got an engineering degree, and as I understand it, you thought it'd be good to get involved in federal projects. And what was your thinking on being attracted to doing engineering projects at a federal level? If I got the story straight, or you can straighten me out if I didn't.
Well, I was a lucky college graduate, I say, because I was sent to New York by the former head of the Standard Oil of New Jersey to see his son-in-law, who was the secretary in Rockefeller Center of Standard Oil, New Jersey, to be given a job and trained in like he was trained, and he became the head of Standard Oil of New Jersey. But meanwhile, I had written to Boeing because I wanted to be, I really loved Boeing. I still do. I love the Boeing aircraft. So I had written to Boeing, and I had a letter from Boeing. That all I had to do was accept, and they would pay my airfare and everything else and get me started in the Northwest, which is, I love the mountains of the Northwest. So that was ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So meanwhile, the first girl I had ever dated in high school and had always liked, and through the whole war and everything, didn't get to see much of her. And she was popular with about 35 other guys. So she's working in New York for the Reader's Digest. So I said to myself, well, if I leave her here and go someplace else, I may not come out the winner.
Yeah.
So I also had another offer for a nothing job in New York, but it was right in New York. So guess which job I picked? I picked a nothing job. And to this day, I realize if I had been, and someone, I think that's my life's biggest mistake, because I think I realize now that both of us, if I'd have gone to Boeing in Seattle or taken the other job, I think that I still could have talked her into marrying me, because I think she realized that it was a good, the sensible thing to do.
This is.
We didn't have that kind of communication at that time, so I took the nothing job.
Well, if we haven't talked, yeah.
But what happened is that I had 2 years of that, and then I got with one of the leading engineering firms. And I started,
let me go back for just a second. Sorry, we got you a bottle of water if you get thirsty. But so you came to the conclusion that you had up enough momentum with this young lady that even if you'd gone across the country
But that
away,
was
you could have
after the
still
fact.
still sealed the deal with her and
That was
made it
it.
happen.
Probably, but
Probably.
probably, but I'm not certain.
No, but you stayed in New York and you are certain, and you guys got married.
The nothing job was, at least, even my nothing job was a different job, because I was the site engineer on the world's tallest chimney in El Paso, Texas, for American Smelting and Refining. And I stood on a 6-inch wall, concrete wall, 610 feet in the air.
Wow.
And believe me, that is
Yeah.
no experience.
Oh my word. And yeah, brother. Okay. Jeez. The little 600 feet standing on a concrete wall is a little different than 600 feet looking out the window of an airplane. I think we can agree.
It's a totally different experience, believe me.
Oh, man. And that world's tallest, that may come into play before this conversation is over.
It finally ended up on the ground, but that's because
Wow.
it was for American smelting and refining, and all the big refineries are kind of going under because of pollution.
Interesting. So moving along from that, but I make sure I got the story straight. So this gal that you stayed on the East Coast for, did you in fact end up marrying her?
Yes,
Okay, seal the deal. Very good. How long were you married? Are married?
she's gone now. 1911, 10 years. So from back after World War II till 1911.
To
I mean, 2011. 2011.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Very good.
Just
Well.
shy of 60 years, I guess.
Wow. Amazing. So moving along, after the world's tallest smokestack.
I went to work for an engineering firm in New York, very prestigious engineering firm. And they were getting in, and the Cold War was heating up, and they were getting lots of engineering projects. And that's when I started out with all of these projects for the federal government, starting with my first really big project was we did the first 10 radar sites in defense against Russian aircraft. It's called Pine Tree. It was in Newfoundland and Labrador, and one of them was on Baffin Island. They actually preceded the Dew Line. The Dew Line was a very famous line that ran all across northern Canada, but we actually had the first 10. And that was kind of great because I seemed to get on the ground floor of these things, So, like I said, that became all the way across from Alaska to our sites. And that was in way back in, when did we do that? That was back in about 1951.
Wow.
Long time ago.
Oh yeah, that was early for
And
those
it
kind
was
of
strictly
operations.
in
Yeah.
defense against low-level Russian bombers across the Atlantic.
Interesting. So that was
Then I went to Europe on 3 NATO air bases. I was in Paris for a year, and in the office of a French compatriot, and we did 3 NATO air bases. Then I
Interesting.
came back,
and that was air traffic radar type radar in the French bases, or was that warning radar?
no, they were actually air bases. Le Mans, Chaumont, and Toul, but they were actually physical airfields in defense against, again, the Russians.
Oh, okay. So these were
NATO bases, NATO air bases.
and the radar installations. The purpose was it early warning?
We didn't do that. We did the air bases.
Oh, you did the bases themselves. I'm sorry. I was transposing
Back-
radar onto
no,
it. Okay.
no, radar
You
was
had-
back at the other.
You had diversified out of just radar and now into
Yeah, we did the whole
the
air
structural, the
base.
infrastructure. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so that's going to play into
We
the
did 3 air
conversation.
bases there.
Gotcha.
And then next thing you know, I got sent off to Pakistan, and we did Pakistan joined CETO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. So I went to Pakistan, and I was in charge of the crew that designed the military bases from Karachi all the way up to the Himalayas. And we designed the division cantonment at Carrion, And I always wondered why, supposedly it was Carrion was up in the northeast corner, close to a little piece of China that sticks up out to the west there. But it didn't really seem that way. It seemed like it was awful close to India. And
I was wondering.
and it turns out that they lost that what's the name of that province they lost to India?
The Kashmir?
Kashmir, yeah. Kashmir actually it was mostly Pakistani, mostly, when we did the work over there for CETO, Pakistan had just separated from India.
Oh,
And because Pakistan was all the Muslims, as against the Indian religions, they had there were a lot of Muslims in the east and a lot of Muslims in the west. And they separated into two countries. It was in East Pakistan. East Pakistan is gone now. It became something else. It's separated from Pakistan. But anyway, at that time, they had just separated. As a matter of fact, they had 1 million, where Karachi is, they had 1 million Muslims living on the beach. They had no homes. They just lived on the beach, and the beach was their sewage and everything else, without going in and out for the day.
Oh, my
And
Lord.
when we had to go from Karachi to the Corps of Engineers base for the U.S. government, we had to go by there, and we used to call it Breathless Bend.
Yeah, understandably.
But anyway, but it was interesting, and I got to see the high Himalayas, and we had one ammunition dump that was at 12,000 feet up in the Himalayas.
Jeez.
The plans we were developing the plans for it.
Wow.
And I went up there with these Pakistani officers.
How'd that go?
It was great with the Pakistani in South Pakistan, in Karachi. All of the Pakistani are 5 feet high, and up in the mountains, all of the Pakistani are 6'6" high.
Interesting. That's pretty
I
wild.
haven't figured that one out.
Boy, what a difference. All right, so that's got us up to somewhere around what, the early 60s or so?
Let's see, that was maybe what, 50, 56. Yeah, it's sort of approaching the 60s.
Approaching the
I think
60s.
I think then the next thing after that was the citizens of Los Angeles and San Francisco complained their air bases, like Alameda were in San Francisco, their air base, when they unloaded the planes from the carriers, and they went in for training, or when they were training off the base, they used to fly right down San Francisco Bay, right almost above the bridges, and San Francisco and Los Angeles, the government stated, as they got bigger, they didn't like that. So they went down into the Central Valley and designed a new airfield to offload all the carriers for the West Coast, all the way up and down into a new air base. So I had to go to San Francisco for a couple of years to be in the office in partnership with a San Francisco architect, and we designed we didn't do the flight line. Some of the San Francisco firm had the flight line, but we had the rest of the air base. It was Naval Air Station Lemoore, and it still exists, Naval Air Station Lemoore. That's where they unload all the carrier aircraft.
Interesting.
So that lasted until That lasted until 60, and then I came back to New York to my home firm.
Wow.
And by then I
so-
decided that the architects were getting all the jobs. So I joined, and actually the architectural guys were the head of most, with me as the project manager, the partners were generally architects that were working with me. So I decided, well, if I'm going to be like this, get to where I can go to the government and get jobs, I got to be an architect and an engineer.
Interesting.
So I started going to night school, and I finally got an architect's license.
So before you started the architect school, was your name known like, okay, we got a big project, let's go see if Philip's available?
Yeah.
You were that well known
As a
in the
matter of
industry?
fact, that's what happened to me, because I had to leave Irvine when I was still very active. I had to leave him for financial and personal reasons. And I remarked, the one thing is, whenever I left a job and somebody had a big job of my type, I heard from him almost immediately, So
That's an endorsement.
I worked with the George A. Fuller Company, which when sought out by them for a job. And that was more construction, but the fact that I was an architect engineer on big projects didn't matter. And after that, I worked for another firm that actually was a contractor and built the things. And I went back to an architectural engineering firm again and did the Terminal C at Newark Airport. Terminal C was a shell until it was taken over by, I knew I wasn't going to remember the name of this airline. But they redid Terminal C, and we put two big wings on it and everything. It's about $100 million. It was a big job at that time.
Wow.
And
what time frame would that have been roughly?
I ended up doing that. I left that job in 69. So 69 and 24. How old was I? 69 and 25. 65 years old, right? Yeah. Then I took a job down in kind of a retirement job down in Florida.
Is that kind of just some sideline work you did? That's a loaded question.
You're talking about this. You're talking about this side. The last job I had.
Yeah, your last big one. Or is there more filling in?
The last job actually was working for the Kiplingers. You ever heard of the Kiplinger Washington News?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. They heard about the fact that this started because you say people hear about me, and they wanted they were big in real estate development and all kinds of new projects they had about $250 million. So they wanted somebody to look after them. They had a guy that was coming to their branch office, but he was 3 or 4 years away. So they hired me to fill in that. So I ended up working another 4 years or so for them. And they were actually the best owners I ever had, because I was in I'm trying to. Sorry, I was in Florida, at the time.
It'll come back to you.
No, it's funny. Vero Beach. I couldn't think of the name.
Where we are now.
Yeah.
So, of course, at some point in time, you got engaged with a NASA project, which would have been.
That was in 60.
Okay.
That lasted, and the deal with that was that what was it? President Kennedy said we were going to go to the moon by 70. So, you know, since we were building the building that this all was going to happen in, we were the first ones to be put under the gun, so to speak.
Let's hear this story. This is a good one.
No, it just meant that we had to hire, we had like 4 New York firms that we had to put the guys together. That was another thing. These 4 firms all thought that they would, like one was a structural engineer and we were the architects and somebody else was something else, you know. They all thought they were going to work in their home office, you know, but we were the initiators way back when with the Pakistan projects and all these projects of the joint venture. And we insisted that wherever there was a big project with a die cast time that had to be met, that you couldn't depend upon people in outlying places doing the things that they're supposed to do. You had to have them all in one place, so that we formed what they call a joint venture.
Interesting.
And we really initiated the joint venture. Now it's very common, but we initiated it where you take all your different trades and put them together, and you don't have to go anyplace else to talk to people and get them to do things.
Interesting. So with all that coming together, you got a opportunity of a lifetime to build a structure of grandeur that I'll let you talk about at the Cape.
Right, and we did the same thing in '60. I was on vacation, and Max Irvin, the king, he called me and said that it looks like we're going to get this job. And he says, I want to have the Corps of Engineers take you over to look at the site. And so he got the Corps of Engineers, Jacksonville District. This captain came down in a Jeep. And I was in, what's my town? I was trying to think of this before. I can't think of where I was before I came up here to Vero Beach.
Down south of Vero?
Yeah. Anyway,
We'll get back to it.
we'll get back to it. I got a mental block.
I can relate.
97 makes it difficult sometimes.
97, ladies and gentlemen.
So anyway, he called me and they said that I was to come up to the Cape, and that a Corps of Engineers guy would meet me there and take me out to show me the site. Well, this Corps of Engineers guy came up to take me out to show me the site, and all we saw were eagles and alligators. But he did show me where they're going to have the main buildings, and also where they were going to unload the rockets by barge from because they were being done in Alabama, Mississippi, down in the south, and it was very interesting. So we started out. I think we basically finished our work by to where we weren't in the way of anybody by 63, 64. And of course, they were still working on the rockets and things. And it was also, I forgot to say that the kickoff also was that Werner von Braun came into our New York office too. He visited us in New York office, which was interesting and kind of different.
Yeah, you bet. That is definitely, well, the structure we keep referencing, or I keep alluding to here,
It's a vehicle assembly building.
is, there it is, the VAB. Philip,
Vehicle assembly building.
and Philip is credited with this being his baby. So that's why we alluded to world's tallest smokestack, and this is the World's largest one-story building, I think, is part of the billet. Most interior cubic volume under air, if I recall. And we can thank Philip for having this building present.
Actually, the most interesting building is the building, the low building right next to it, which is a launch control center. And that's where even now, when they have a launch, all the electronic equipment and all the people and all and it has a big window across it, which they close. They used to close when the big rockets went up in case there was an explosion. Thank God there never was. But anyway, the Launch Control Center, and when I was last at the Cape, I think it was in what am I talking about? 2020. So I was, what, 95 years old. They took us up on the roof, which is 5 acres in the area. And we were able to see all the new sites, you know, for the new private companies that are launching from
So
there.
we're talking like SpaceX and Blue
SpaceX,
Origin and
Blue Origin, all of them.
all of.
And you can see them from up there. You can see the whole panorama from up there. It was very interesting. But the most interesting thing was still the Launch Control Center, because from that Launch Control Center, they can actually look at every temperature, everything that's happening on that base is up on the walls on instruments of some kind.
Interesting.
So they know exactly what's happening, what temperature, what speeds, what this, what that, of anything that's happening internally or externally in that Launch Control Center.
Very interesting. Well, it's a spectacular building still. My residence is less than 20 miles southwest of there, back on the mainland. And you don't have to drive very far from my house to be able to see it, the building. And it's an amazing environment in general to be in the distant backyard. So anyway, that is quite an accomplishment to have been lead on something of that magnitude. So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you.
Any thoughts about the space program at this point in time going forward? Anything about our efforts to get back to the moon and on beyond to Mars at some point?
Well, I'm obviously, I think it's something that man has to do. But you know, compared, if you're talking about really getting into space the way that we have gotten into everything that's on this world that we're on now, the task of getting into space is enormous. It's just beyond comprehension compared to the task of us getting out of the cave to where we are now here. And it just boggles my mind. I don't know how we're going to do it. I mean, it's just a matter of even people just living long enough to take some of the steps to do it, because it's an overwhelming realm. I mean, and in talking to you about it, I get so lost by being so far away from everything, and still got places. It keeps going and going and going. Where is the end? I don't know.
Good question. I guess we'll find out over time.
I don't know how much time it's going to take or who is going to find out.
Be patient, right? Man's desire to explore.
I think our world may be gone before we find out.
I hear what you're saying, Philip. I hear what you're saying. That is the end of my questions, other than the one last one, and that is any comments in general, anything else you'd like to add to it? And the big one is, do you have any sage advice for anybody that may get to view this video or in general. I'm figuring 97 years old with the background he's got, there's a lot of experience. And you know what they say about how you get experience, you go through life and learn yet pluses and minuses and put it all together. So we heard a little bit about thoughts about further space exploration. Anything else you want to throw into that?
Well, I might get into one of my other favorite subjects, which is young people and youth.
Well, now, wait,
And-
Phil, I gotta tell you, I am post-social security age, just to be clear here.
No, I'm talking to whoever may see this.
That kind of figure.
Hopefully, maybe somebody under the age of 97 will see this. But I feel that youth can do it if they have a goal, that youth can do anything they want to do. In other words, I don't believe that even poor kids in bad situations, if they can get it in their mind, or somebody will put it in their mind to do the things they want to do, to be educated in the way that they want to be educated, to do the things for the world that they want to do, that they can do it. I don't believe there's a noose, there's a rope on anybody that prevents them from doing it. The sad part of it is that there's not enough messenger givers. There aren't to help people out at the time that they need to get, need somebody to give them the message. But I just believe that I believe in the youth, the young people, and I just think that they ought to be looking all the time for avenues to improve their life and the lives of all the people around them.
Excellent commentary, very salient, and I certainly agree with what you're saying. And it's great to hear somebody from your stature reflecting at that level on that subject. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for this entire interview. I know there's a lot of people are going to enjoy this very much, and thank you for everything that you have done. And this has been an absolute pleasure, and I'll look forward to hopefully seeing you some more if I can get down south here, and continuing, because I'm sure there's a whole lot more to talk about. And with that being said, 99th Bomb Group Historical Society, I think we have a very nice addition for the files there.
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate all the attention I'm getting at such an advanced age. Just ready to plow off to another adventure.
Well,
Thank you.
I'll tell you what, as he said, 97, and you'd never know it if he didn't tell you. But thank you again, Philip. Okay, that's it. When we are out.
Now the next problem is, what does the sound like?
Yeah, that's what we're going to find out. That might.
I have a feeling,
Yeah.
especially my voice, because my voice is not really resonating in it.
Well, hopefully Gary or somebody will be able to doctor the or will be able to doctor the audio.
We can't hear any of it.
We're going to find out.
Oh,
The recording is, and I'm looking at this, and just so everybody knows, I looked down at about halfway through the interview and I thought that the recording portion had been deselected. Luckily it wasn't. So if you caught a look of angst on my face followed by relief, that's what it was. And here goes the end of the recording.